So today, um, we're going on a little journey, diving into the heart of the Enlightenment and exploring Thomas Jefferson's personal beliefs.
Yeah.
But we're doing it through a pretty unusual lens. His self-compiled The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, which most people call the Jefferson Bible.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating paradox when you think about it, isn't it? I mean, you've got this founding father, a champion of reason, secular government and all that, but then here he is meticulously crafting his own version of scripture.
Yeah, definitely piques the curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar, what exactly the Jefferson Bible? It wasn't just like, your average highlighter and notes situation, was it?
Oh, not at all. Picture this. It's Jefferson, sometime between 1803 and 1820. And he's surrounded by all these different copies of the New Testament, Greek, Latin, French, even English. And get this, he's not just reading them. He's got a razor and glue out, physically extracting verses like cutting and pasting to assemble his own personalized version.
Wait, hold on. Literally cut and paste? Wow, that's some serious dedication to a personal project. So, was he actually trying to, rewrite the Bible, or was it something else entirely?
He was aiming for something, well, I'd say far more radical. Jefferson, he was really after the pure moral philosophy of Jesus. He wanted to distill that, strip away all the supernatural elements, the theological interpretations that were just so common in his time. It was incredibly bold, especially considering how deeply religion and politics were intertwined back then.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly daring, especially, like you said, for someone in his position. And if he kept it private during his lifetime, why the secrecy? What was the big deal?
Well, think about it. Jefferson's work, it directly challenged the accepted religious views of the time, the orthodoxy. This was an era when citing the Bible as the absolute word was just, it was the norm. But his approach, emphasizing reason and personal interpretation, well, that was right in line with the whole Enlightenment thing, but it was also a stance that could be easily misinterpreted, even though, ironically, it laid the groundwork for ideas we take for granted now, like the separation of church and state.
It's definitely a side of him we don't often hear about.
Yeah.
Most people know the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
Jefferson, right?
Yeah.
Not the biblical scholar.
Exactly. And this project, it really shines a light on, I think, a key tension of the Enlightenment. How do you grapple with faith in an age that's becoming increasingly captivated by reason? I mean, you had figures like Locke and Newton really shaking things up, challenging the old views. Jefferson was deeply influenced by them, and in a way, he was trying to reconcile his own beliefs with this whole new intellectual landscape.
So how did that tension between faith and reason, how did that actually play out in the content of the Jefferson Bible itself?
Yeah.
What made the cut and what ended up on the proverbial cutting room floor?
He included a lot of Jesus's moral teaching, especially the ones about things like social justice, ethical conduct, that sort of thing. The Sermon on the Mount, with all its emphasis on compassion, humility, peace, that features really prominently. He even kept some miracles in, although he kind of presented them in a way that didn't necessarily rely on the supernatural. It's almost as if he was inviting the reader to find their own meaning in those events, even if their interpretation was different from what tradition might dictate.
Yeah, it seems like he was trying to find that common ground between faith and reason, extracting a kind of timeless moral code from a text that a lot of people saw through a purely theological lens. Did anything about what he chose to emphasize, did anything surprise you?
Oh, absolutely. Even just the arrangement of it all is fascinating. He presents Jesus's life and teachings chronologically, weaving a narrative that emphasizes how the ideas progress. It's almost like he's crafting a philosophical treatise on ethical living and using the Gospels as his primary source material.
It's so interesting how he took this text that everyone knew and through just careful selection and arrangement presented this completely new perspective.
And that's exactly why the Jefferson Bible, even though it wasn't actually published until much later, after he died, became so significant. It wasn't meant to replace the Bible, not at all, but it was this personal reflection on what he saw as timeless wisdom, something that could guide people, even nations.
It's almost like he was saying, here, this is the essence. This is what I find valuable, what speaks to me on a fundamental human level.
Exactly. And, that idea, it still resonates even today. The historical and theological context, that's crucial. But Jefferson's endeavor kind of makes you ask, if we each created our own life and morals compilation, what would it look like?
It's a tantalizing thought experiment, isn't it? Like, to take any text and boil it down to its absolute core principles, the stuff that really matters. But I'm curious, were there any parts of the traditional Gospels that Jefferson just I don't know, couldn't quite square with his whole Enlightenment way of thinking.
Oh, absolutely. Anything that really emphasized Jesus's divinity or the more, I guess you could say, mystical aspects of what he did, those were mostly left out. He seemed to connect more with the human side of Jesus, the teacher whose message was all about, ethical behavior, social responsibility, that kind of thing.
So it's like he acknowledged the miracles, but he presented them in a way that didn't need a supernatural explanation.
Right.
Almost like he was inviting people to find their own meaning in those stories, even if they interpreted them differently than, say, a more traditional view.
Exactly. You're right on the money there. He even went so far as to cut out the entire book of Revelation, which, given his focus on practical morality, stuff that you could actually apply to daily life, makes sense, right? I mean, all that apocalyptic imagery, the prophecies, it probably just struck him as kind of irrelevant to, building a just society in the here and now.
Yeah, it tracks. It's like he was saying, hold on, let's not get too caught up in what might happen after we die. We've got a chance to make this world better, so let's focus on that.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that thought-provoking question from earlier. What would your life and morals look like? What teachings really resonate with you and why?
It's a really interesting exercise when you think about it. Forces you to think about not just what you believe, but how those beliefs line up, maybe don't line up, with the texts and traditions that have shaped our cultures, right?
Absolutely. And it reminds us that interpretation, it's not passive, it's something we actively do. Jefferson, by being so hands-on, he reminds us that we're not just empty vessels waiting to be filled with wisdom. We have a role in shaping meaning and figuring out how to apply it to our lives.
So it's not just about understanding Jefferson, but about understanding ourselves,
There's
right?
a go.
His Jefferson Bible becomes a sort of mirror reflecting our own values, how we choose to engage with these big questions.
Exactly. But we can't forget, Jefferson was living in a very different world, so how much of what he did was just, a product of his time, and how much of it goes beyond those historical boundaries and speaks to us today?
It really makes you think, especially today, it feels like we're always trying to figure out how to deal with all these different beliefs and values in the world. So did Jefferson actually manage to separate what's timeless from what just the product of the world he lived in? Or was his whole project just, I don't know, kind of a snapshot of his era?
That is the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer, which is, I think, why the Jefferson Bible still fascinates people. I mean, on the one hand, you can't deny it, his focus on reason, on secular ethics. It's totally a reflection of those Enlightenment ideals that were huge in his world. And
Yeah.
let's be real, some of the things we're dealing with today, he probably couldn't even imagine them.
Like what? The rise of fundamentalism, maybe? Or those debates about science and religion that never seem to go away?
Exactly. Those are definitely things that have become way more, complex since Jefferson's time.
For sure.
But having said that, the main thing he was wrestling with, how to create a society that's both just ND moral when people have different beliefs, that feels pretty familiar, don't you think?
Yeah, totally.
Think about the concept of secular ethics, the idea that there can be this universal moral code, something that's true even if you don't follow a specific religion. That's something Jefferson seemed to be really interested in, and it's still a hot topic today.
It's like he was looking ahead to a time when people could have their own deeply held beliefs, but still agree on some basic ethical principles for society as a whole.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. We're still grappling with the same questions he was wrestling with centuries ago.
It just shows how much his project really tapped into some fundamental human questions, And it brings us back to you, the listener. What if you were to try this? If you were to create your own personal life and morals, what would that say about what you value, how you see the world?
It's not just an academic exercise, is it? It's more like a journey of self-discovery.
Yeah.
Figuring out which of the ideas that have shaped you, which ones actually matter to you, which ones you want to hold on to.
Exactly. And that is the real legacy of the Jefferson Bible. It's a reminder that engaging with these texts, these important figures from the past, it shouldn't be about blind faith or just memorizing stuff. It's about asking those tough questions, challenging what you think you know, and ultimately figuring out what it means to live a good life, a life that has meaning.
So, even though Jefferson might not have had all the answers, and yeah, his project definitely reflects the time period he lived in, he gave us a really valuable way of thinking about these timeless questions.
He did indeed. And who knows, maybe as you explore your own life and morals, as you ask yourself those questions, you'll find that you're actually getting to know yourself and the world a little better.
What a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the mind of Thomas Jefferson. And remember, this is just the beginning. Keep exploring, keep asking those big questions. We'll see you next time.